Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to the Speakeasy. Today is Valentine's Day, and I'm Nate Morgan-Locke, and I'm all alone. Well, I'm not really, because I'm with you and you're with me, and I hope you're looking forward to the rest of the show. I'm delighted not only to be joined by you, but also to be joined by Glen Scrivener. Hello, Glen.
All by yourself. Don't wanna be. Hello.
Hello, where are you, Glen?
I'm in the same place I've been for the last 8 days straight. COVID jail.
Goodness.
Here I am.
COVID
Welcome.
jail.
Welcome. Yeah.
Still
This is
unable to take a lateral test properly.
Well, I
Easy
was
for
so
me to say.
relieved 8 days ago, like for the first time ever, I had proof that I could actually take a test correctly. Because up until then, I just thought for the last 18 months I must have been doing it wrong. But then, when was it? Let me find my 8 days ago. It was something like this one, right? And then I've been having these kinds of ones, and they've been getting progressively, fainter, and fainter, and now just this. This is all that stands between me and freedom. This tiny.
I don't even think that the resolution is high enough for us to be able to see that line. But you're staying put. You're being well behaved. Okay, but it's Valentine's Day. Has that brought any relief? I know you're locked in a room in your house, but has it brought any relief today?
Well, my wife brought me a slice of toast cut into a love heart. So, that was romantic. And I handed her my washing, which I guess was shaped in the shape of an anatomical heart. I guess you'd probably make that link, but it has not been the most romantic Valentine's Day. How about for you?
Well, I'm hoping that I'm not in too much trouble for doing a speakeasy with you when I could be having to with my wife, because I do not have COVID. Anyway, what are we going to talk about this evening, Glen? We've called it Love, Damned Love and Statistics. If anyone doesn't get that reference, I think it's from Mark Twain. Lies, damned lies and statistics. But we're talking about love and stats. What does that mean, Glen?
One of these days I'm going to do a sermon on Numbers 13, 14, and I think I will call it Spies, Damned Spies, and Logistics. But that's for another day. Today I want to talk to you about some statistics I found online about relationships. And of course, like anyone who's like into social policy and, little lobby groups wants to put things out on Valentine's Day about marriage and family and couples and relationships and that sort of thing. I found some interesting statistics from the Institute for Family Studies, talking about married women, different comparisons between men and women, people who say they are very happy with their spouse. So for married men, 65% say they are very happy with their spouse. 68% of women say they are very happy with their spouse. When it goes to cohabiting, I found this interesting. Men slightly more, 67% say they are very happy with their spouse, and 55%. So quite a marked kind of decrease in happiness when you compare married state to the cohabiting state. Bear that in mind. We'll go through a few stats like this.
Okay.
Here are the percentage of people who are saying they're very happy with their relationship. When you break it down by who asked who onto the first date. And so if it's a man asking a woman on his first date, he is very happy with their relationship at a rate of 70%, females at the rate of 59%. Now, interestingly, when it's the other person who asks you out, a man is markedly less happy with the relationship. Only 46% say that they are very happy with their relationship if the other person asked them out, as opposed to 63% of women. That's another thing. Interesting. Bear it in mind.
Okay. We're building an argument.
Yeah. Here are my data points. So here's another data point. So men are more likely to ask for the first date. Nobody is going to be surprised by that, are they? But overall, 53% the initiator is the man, 13% the initiator is the woman. And I guess the other occasions are they can't remember, or they like simultaneously ask each other out for a date. I don't really know.
Or it was a blind date. Maybe
Right.
that was how it was arranged. I don't know.
Marriage. Yeah.
Yes.
Could be. But overwhelmingly, it's the man asking the woman. Men propose, women dispose, as the saying goes. Marital satisfaction is higher among those who meet at church. It's the highest rate of marital satisfaction is found among couples that meet at church.
Is this the third data point then? Okay, so what have we got? What have we had so far then? We've had that married men are happier. Was that the first point? Generally,
actually, they're slightly happier cohabiting than they are when married, but women are much less happier. They are much less happy when cohabiting as opposed to being married. Okay. So the covenant relationship kind of binding the man is a more uncomfortable thing for the man, and it's a more secure thing for the woman.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is interesting. And it's by and large it's the man who asks and the woman who has right of veto and says yes or no and jog on and those sorts of things. And then, people meeting in church are the happiest people when it comes to being married. Now, I don't know what you make of that, Nate. You might just think these are just sort of commonplace truths. But what I was reminded of when we saw especially this stat about women are much less happy in the cohabiting state and men are slightly less happy in the married state, is to go back to Matthew 19 and kind of see, the sexual revolution that has actually gripped the world is one in which the sexes are equalized. We're very familiar with the 1960s sexual revolution and thinking that the swinging 60s, that was a sexual revolution. And that's when the genders were equalized. And I guess in the 60s, the genders were equalized because through the technology of contraception, women were able to be as licentious as men had always been. And so the sexes were kind of equalized in that sense. Whereas actually the original sexual revolution of the first century was an equalization, but it went in the other direction. It was men are now commanded to be as modest and restricted as women had always been. And so Jesus in Matthew 19 says, you've got to one man, one woman for life. That's it. Yeah. And if anyone thinks that's too much, well, you can always be a eunuch for the kingdom, but those are your options.
Yeah.
And how interesting that the revolution born out of this teaching has been for the blessing and benefit of the world. That actually restraining male sexuality, tying a man to his sexual choices and to the offspring of his sexual choices, makes men slightly less happy in the survey. Yes. Makes women a heck of a lot more happy, and makes children flourish and grow. And it has been for the liberation of the world, but that is the sexual revolution that has really brought happiness and freedom to the world.
Yeah, and so the sexual revolution that Jesus brings about is to restrict men to the same extent that women had been restricted. The 1960s lets women be as bad as men. In that sense.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so the very concept of relationship, it seems to me, is one of commitment, and saying yes to one thing is to say no to something else. And so it's, in one sense, it's hardly surprising when we, as we both know men's hearts better than we know anyone else's, that being restricted and being forced, well, not forced, but committing yourself to something might not initially, for many people, feel like the most wonderful thing, but in the long term it produces happier, happy wife, happy life,
And it birthed a real sense of the equality of the sexes, and it birthed a real sense of consent being at the heart of all things, because, you know, in the classical world, it was just elite men who had as many wives as they possibly could. And of course, you know, if Solomon's got all the concubines, there aren't that many for all the rest of the guys to go around, which is a really bad thing for all those concubines and wives. It's also a really bad thing for all the guys who can't settle down and get married. But that is what male sexuality looks like in the wild. And what you get with Jesus is through the real restraint of their sexuality. Joseph Henrik, he wrote the book The Weirdest People in the World. He said that the church reached down and grabbed men by the testicles, right? Which is a very
beautiful
romantic
image,
isn't it for Valentine's Day? But he doesn't really have a very good explanation, I don't think, for why there was such a sexual revolution in the early centuries of the church, because the church had absolutely no authority to do that. They were not in charge of things, and yet somehow men gave up their rights, and suddenly into a culture where there were 25 different words for prostitute in Latin, and not a single way to speak of a male virgin. Okay, naturally,
Okay.
the word virgin just means a female virgin, and then the Christians came along, and they had to, and that's why Jesus has to use things like you have to be a eunuch for the kingdom and things like that.
Right.
The concept of a male virgin was just absolutely ridiculous. Interestingly, these days it's become ridiculous again. You know, the film The 40-Year-Old Virgin could not be anything but a comedy.
Yeah. And that sense that in the first century, there was, we don't even have a concept of what you're really talking about. It's so unthinkable. It's so outside of the Overton window for what we can expect that you kind of need to mangle together other words to create the idea we're really talking about. And so I suppose the radical nature of Christian marriage is something that bizarrely we've become so familiar with that it became, you know, the horizon of our expectations was Christian marriage. That must be what marriage is, certainly for the West, in a Christian sort of Christian countries. That then the sexual revolutions came along and said, oh no, we've got this brand new thing. And you sort of went, oh no, this really was around and has been around for a long time in lots of places. And it's not brought a great deal of deep joy and happiness. In fact, quite the opposite. It seems to bring remarkable amounts of shame and suffering and pain and abuse. You know, it sort of seems to invite that kind of the dynamic which most naturally flows out from this is not love, commitment, sacrifice, honor, respect. It's actually to crush the weak and the vulnerable.
Sure, because like male sexuality in its natural state, there's nothing biologically to tie a man to his mate or to his offspring. There's nothing biologically. A woman is tied to her offspring. She's got to carry them in her body. A man biologically does not have to. You culturally have to tie a man to his woman and to his children. And a man has to voluntarily kind of do that. And we rely on that in order to have family, in order to have these bonds of unbreakable love and to nurture children in the context of a loving family. Without marriage, you absolutely do not have that, and you don't have either the sense of the woman's right to choose, the woman's right to consent and say yes or no. In traditional societies, it is arranged marriages and all that kind of stuff, and some of that can work really well if there's an honoring of individuals and persons and who they really are. But we take for granted now. Romance. We take for granted now that you choose who you marry because they are your heart's desire, which is it's a beautiful fruit of the Jesus Revolution.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and that love and marriage, they go together, Glenn. I think like a horse and carriage. You can't have one without the other. But bizarrely, I think, I mean, my familiarity with that song is not, Frank Sinatra's, but as it was played on what was it, Al Bundy?
Married
Was it
with
called
Children?
Married
Was
with
it
Children?
Married with Children?
And culturally, what we've seen is a cynicism towards that idea, that song is then played as a kind of as an ironic piece, because now we're going to get this, kind of lazy, uncommitted husband who has this wife, and they just seem to bicker with each other, and that's sort of just the way that it goes. Now, it's a sitcom, so it's obviously kind of resolves itself each episode, but no one learns anything, no one changes. Again, James Carey has talked to us before about the nature of sitcom being that the characters have to kind of return to room temperature each time. Yes. But I suppose what I was thinking about with Valentine's Day today is just how naturally cynical so many people are about the concept. And it's almost as though there's a very small number of people who are sort of on the edge of properly dating someone or going out with them or being engaged to them. It's for those people, but everyone else can be very cynical about the whole concept of romance. It's all far too lovey-dovey, and let's just wait till the 15th when the chocolates are all discounted.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real shame that for so many of us, love, relationships and marriage have become viewed so cynically. And I want to sort of, wave the flag for romance, and I say that sitting here speaking on a podcast when I could be doing something else.
Romance.
But so essentially saying that the romantic comedy, right, the Hallmark holiday, which is, Valentine's Day, the Hallmark movie is not something to dismiss and as fantasy and whatever. It's light and fluffy and sentimental, but to say, no, this is actually teaching us something wonderfully true about the world that we live in, about the nature of the world we live in.
Yeah. And it's a penultimate good, otherwise you and I would not be doing this on Valentine's Day. We'd be cozying up and I wouldn't because I've got COVID, but then actually, two people who are just part couple, part sofa watching Netflix till they die, it is not, the great eschatological vision of that is not the beatific vision.
Yeah.
And interestingly, in Matthew 19, Jesus not only says one man, woman for life, he also says, or even better, you could be a eunuch for the kingdom.
Yeah.
And eunuchs really were those who had their testicles grabbed and so that they would not be a threat to their, the master's women, but so that they would serve undistractedly in his household. And Jesus says, you can serve undistractedly in the kingdom of God. And if you can accept that, do it, says Jesus. It's better. And 1 Corinthians 7, Paul says, something similar. So that it's not as though, married couples have it all figured out and everyone else is living a lesser state. I would actually argue that obviously the true romance is Christ and the church. And there are different ways that different members of the church can reflect that reality out to the world. And you can reflect that reality out to the world like the virgin waiting for the great bridegroom in that parable, or you can reflect it in terms of a husband-wife relationship. But the romantic relationship where you are just lost in each other's gaze on a sort of horizontal level, that can get a little bit cloying.
And you've got to choose your words very carefully, and I understand that. But and that idea that it is a penultimate good. And so for those of us who are married, not to idolize our partners or idolize the marriage as being the most important thing, and that actually they work really well as a penultimate good. In fact, when they're properly ordered within, the relationship of both concerned for the glory of God and committed to Him above all, knowing that they get their fullest understanding of themselves and their spouse and the context for their own marriage, that it comes from the Lord, that actually allows marriages to flourish and to serve the purpose for which they were created, far greater than anyone who's, as you say, eyes fixed on each other and can't see anything else.
Yeah, a friend of mine was Larry Crabb, wrote many books about counseling and marriage, and he said he's counseled thousands of couples, and he says it's very common to have a tick on a dog relationship. One partner is just sucking the life out of the other partner. He said, but most relationships are actually 2 ticks and no dog. It's just, like, these little mosquitoes kind of sucking the life out of each other. And when you don't have this grand vision for the Lord's romance, you will just suck the life out of your partner. Nerd.
You've got to feed on something, haven't you? That's a very odd way to finish this section, but we're talking about Valentine's Day. We've done a number of Valentine's Day videos over the years, which are available on this very YouTube channel if you would seek to find them out. Let us know, what are your Valentine's Day plans? If you're literally watching this now, we don't feel sorry for you or anything. We're glad you're here, and thank you for being here. But we are going to take a little dive into the mailbag in just a few seconds, and then we can have a look through some of the comments as well. See you on the other side. SpeakEasy. Okay, we're back again. Now's the point in the show where we like to have a little think about the life of Speak Life, things that are going on, the community that we're all part of here down in Eastbourne and spread around the UK and the world. Thomas, have you got anything for us to chew on as we think about this? We can do some updates from around the globe a bit later on. Thomas.
Well, hello. You can hear me all right? Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on the show. I have a comment actually from our recent John Dixon interview that Glenn did. Oh, I'm on the screen as well. So Glenn,
I brought you on.
So you went to London to interview John Dixon, right? And so that video went out about a week ago. And so we have one comment on that you might be interested in looking at. He had said that Christ would never condone the Crusades. I'm curious how he would come to that conclusion when there are many examples to the contrary. So I think the context of that was, what about the wars in the Old Testament? God's way of enacting just judgment in certain cases was through holy war. Would the Crusades fall into that category? So yeah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I guess you go to Matthew 5 and you see the way Jesus handles love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. Turn the other cheek. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn the other cheek to them. Go the extra mile. If someone sues you for your cloak, give them the shirt off your back. Later on, he says, do not take up the sword. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. All that kind of stuff. So to take up arms in the name of Jesus seems to be a denial of the one who laid down his arms, that he might be killed. So Jesus did not kill his enemies, rather he was killed by his enemies, and lived in self-giving love as the way to conquer his enemies. And then the New Testament picks that up, and Paul says, we do not use the weapon of earthly warfare. We do use a sword of steel. We use the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And so actually, the Bible kind of subverts that language of holy warfare by saying yes, we do advance the kingdom, but here is the one kingdom that ought not to advance via the sword of steel, but by the sword of the word, that is the sword of persuasion, non-violent education and proclamation. And so that has been, I think, the authentic way of Jesus. There certainly have been many times when Christians have taken up earthly power in order to spread the kingdom. And John Dickson talks about many occasions like that, including the Crusades. He begins his book with the Crusades. But he would say that the Crusades are an example of people playing out of tune, out of key with the beautiful tune. So he says that Jesus gave us a beautiful melody, like a cello sonata, and Christians have come along and over the top of that, and they might have been claiming to add to the beautiful tune. But I think probably you see them as being discordant notes, and the true symphony is not like that.
Yeah. And how do you usually, Glenn, because obviously when you're doing missions, or certainly this used to come up in university missions and things, when people sort of say, okay, so that's all the Jesus of the New Testament. What about the God of the Old Testament? He's totally different from the Jesus of the New Testament, because there's wars going on everywhere. There's, people groups being taken out. How do you tend to respond to that? Because we obviously can't ask John Dickson because he's not here right now.
Well, I think press into those. A great book to read on this would be Skeletons in God's Closet by Joshua Ryan Butler. And he talks about hell, judgment, and holy war. And he says, actually, when you press into these things that are meant to be defeaters for Christian belief, you actually see how they proclaim the good news in a way that's surprising, but ultimately heartwarming. And it's a tough order, to look at hell, judgment, and holy war and come out on the other side punching the air and saying Jesus is great. I think he pulls it off. One of the things he does is just talk about how all those Old Testament narratives are totally subverting your expectations when it comes to Old Testament wars. We go in thinking that the Israelites are like the imperial superpower, and that that they are Goliath and everyone else is David. It's exactly the other way around. David and Goliath is this paradigmatic case, and actually all the war is like that. I mean, they bring victories by going around Jericho 7 times and blowing some trumpets because they have the right furniture. And he's like, these guys are jokes. They are total. It's like the Malawian army, taking on the US army by strumming acoustic guitars, and somehow they bring the victory. It is the subversion of all those expectations. Now, in the Old Testament, there is a nation, and there is politics, and there are steel swords and soldiers and standing armies. All of that is fulfilled in Christ in a quite different way. And so there can never be a Jericho incident that the church goes to, a town like that. The New Testament rules that out. But I think even as you go and step into that Old Testament arrangement, you're stepping into something that is not condoning violence, but actually subverting all our expectations about it.
Yeah. No, I think that one's really helpful. I'd not actually heard the David and Goliath as paradigmatic for Old Testament Israel in their relations with the surrounding nations. But yeah, when you think about it, you read the story of Jericho and you sort of forget how sort of ludicrous it sounds.
And that all their victories come by like jawbones and a tent peg, and it's just and temple furniture that they almost never win battles in conventional, and all their tactics are kind of like they have a little bunch of soldiers who go out, and then they look like they're losing and they withdraw, and then they outflank the maneuvers. Yeah. It is always strength through weakness. It is always the subversion of what you expect. So
are you telling me that most wars in the ancient world weren't fought using musical instruments? Because I think that's what we basically picked up from the Old Testament. It's like, well, this must have been normal. This is perfectly normal. All the nations, all the surrounding nations were doing a lot of sort of trumpet blowing and guitar
you go to the
playing.
British Museum, though. Like, go to the British Museum and you see what the Assyrians looked like. Or you watch 300 and you see the Persian armies and you see, these guys are... You would be absolutely trembling at these guys. And they are totally outnumbered. They are always the minnow in this. So that's one angle on it, and then you've got to do this the sort of the development of the story. In Matthew 19, fascinatingly, we've already referenced Matthew 19 as regards marriage, but Jesus says regarding marriage and divorce, he says, well, Moses allowed you to divorce each other because your hearts were hard, but it was not so in the beginning. And so Jesus speaks of certain Old Testament legislation is non-ideal and is designed to mitigate against the hardness of human hearts, and is a non-ideal application to a specific people in a specific place. But God's original intention was not like that, and Christ's redemptive intention is not like that. And I think marriage and divorce laws are like that, but I think other things, like having a standing army and having rules for warfare, are like that as well.
Yeah. And as you say, seeing how does these particular events and moments in the Old Testament and the New Testament and the history of the church, how do they all sort of connect together within the single story of redemption? And once you lose that meta narrative, that thread, you are simply left with, well, these are all isolated incidents, and how could we ever know which ones to copy and which ones to ignore and which ones to reject? And I think that's one of the things that's so tragic when people who have an interest enough in Christian things to pick up a Bible and to flick through it, but they so often struggle to see that through line from Genesis to Revelation and see just how remarkable it is. I've always sort of thought it was a little bit like someone walking in at the end of A New Hope and seeing Luke Skywalker blow up the Death Star and saying, "Why are you blowing up the Death Star? How? What? I can't believe it."
All those innocent Imperial officers.
But they had families too.
Yeah, but when you're watching the film, you're like, no, this is just and right.
Yeah.
And we're cheering at the end of that because we saw what went before, and we see that this is a victory for justice. And a lot of these simple sort of brickbats just don't work like that because they don't take the narrative of Scripture and the Christocentric nature of God's revelation. They don't take that seriously.
And yet, sneakily, Christ is part of the arguments for them as well, because sneakily, they think, well, we should all be pacifists now. Everybody does. Everybody reads. A Christian reads, a non-Christian reads Joshua in with the same lump in their throat. But that lump in our throat was put there by Jesus, by the one who said, "Put away your sword, for those who live by the sword will die by the sword." Right? Who taught us to turn the other cheek? It's Jesus who has given us that value by which we judge the scriptures to be wanting. But again, it's people finding fault with Christianity for not being Christian enough. And therefore we just got to do the work of going back into the scriptures, figuring out the story and figuring out where we've got our values from in the first place.
What else have we got, Thomas? I mean, that was a very long response from us to a question asked to to John Dixon.
Thank
you.
Is there anything else? Well, as we said today already, it is Valentine's Day, so we just thought we'd share this tweet briefly. Ruth Evans kindly retweeting the Cancel Valentine's video that we released this day a year ago. We were still in lockdown then. But yeah,
Glenn's still in lockdown now. So well done.
There we go. So do go and check that out if you haven't seen it already. And it's probably worth mentioning as well that the Foundry is still open for applications. I can pop this link up, actually. Look at that, a ticker.
Look at that.
Ticker link along the bottom.
Yeah, just to give an update, I was in Liverpool on Friday meeting with a great group of people called AT3 who help to arrange short-term sort of mission, year or two of mission for Americans, particularly coming over to the UK to see what life is like in a sort of post-Christian country. And had a fantastic time with them and was able to share a bit more about the Foundry and what we do. And yes, really great to encourage more people as we look towards the end of this week. We really need to get those US applications in. So if you are watching or listening in the US and you are someone who would be interested in spending 10 months with us down in Eastbourne, to think about theology, think about evangelism, think about story and storytelling, think about communication and media, then please do visit us at www.speaklifefoundry.com, where you can find out more and apply, and maybe even end up like Thomas, right here, asking the questions and moving the stuff along on the Speakeasy. Who knows? Wonders never cease.
Well, absolutely. I would absolutely recommend applying. But I think that's everything from the mailbag. So I will let you guys get back to it.
Okay.
Thanks,
well,
Thomas.
let's jump back in so that we can finish off with our third section, which, as regular viewers and listeners will know, is a little movie tag, movie link, movie reflection game we've been playing. It hasn't got a name yet. And the fact that we're going to start a Lent series soon means it probably will never have a name, but we might return to it soon. Let's throw up a little...
It's not movie tag? Are we going to call it
jingly.
movie tag?
Well, it sort of got called that, didn't it? But then I don't know if it's quite... certainly the fact that I'm not calling it movie tag suggests that it hasn't
denied.
embedded itself in me.
Denied.
So we will tell you more about what that movie is straight after we do this little jingly bit again.
Speakeasy.
I like having a little jingly bit. I think it's quite nice. I know it doesn't last for very long. Doesn't give people time to go and put the kettle on or anything like that.
I liked last time when you said, we're back.
We're back. And we're back. And so the movie we're going to talk about this week is 2005 film The Squid and the Whale, directed by Noah Baumbach and starring Jeff Daniels, Laura Linney, and a young Jesse Eisenberg. Now, Jesse Eisenberg is the link with the movie that we watched last week, which was, of course, Thomas Thorogood's favourite film, The Social Network, where he played Mark Zuckerberg. But in this film, he's sort of playing a version of Noah Baumbach. So Noah Baumbach, if you don't know, as a film director, he's been quite prolific recently with something like A Marriage Story would be one of his, Francis Ha, Meyerowitz Stories, and While We're Young, I think was another one of his. And Noah Baumbach is married to Greta Gerwig, who directed Lady Bird.
Wow.
And it's interesting because a lot of their films have got similar sorts of themes. They have this kind of slice of life sense to them. So as stories, they don't really sort of go anywhere in the kind of, there's this kind of great hero's journey that we went through all the hours on the story clock. But they do show you, I think, a quite authentic portrayal of what life in the modern West is like for so many people. They're quite domestic. They're generally familial themes. The dialogue is kind of hyper real. You know, he writes in every and nod, and it's all kind of scripted. And they're just fantastic. They're fantastic pieces of cinema. And I should warn people who have not yet seen The Squid and the Whale, it's got some fruity bits in it. It's got some fruity language, and it's got a couple of scenes which aren't not the easiest to watch, but certainly as a great description and a presentation of the tragedy of relational breakdown and divorce and its impact on the two children. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Glenn, you had not seen it before this afternoon, is that right?
Yeah, but I have now seen it.
What were your thoughts?
I very much enjoyed it, if that's the right word. It does not flint from showing people at their least impressive, but it's kind of biting for all of that. And so Jeff Daniels plays Jesse Eisenberg's dad, a very unimpressive man who, from scene one, is just a real egotist jerk. They're playing tennis, and it's a brilliant setup because instantly you have like the four members of this family on either side of the net, and actually, and it's the mum is going with the youngest boy, and then Jesse, who looks up to Jeff Daniels, are on the other side. It's like who decided that those were the teams? This is
I know,
this is the most
the
one-sided
dad and the firstborn son versus the mum and the little boy,
and the little guy who's really a little guy, and the first line almost is Jeff Daniels saying, hit it to your mother's backhand, she's weak, and he does, and he's just a totally unimpressive man, and it's kind of bold, really. For Noah Baumbach to kind of present really his family and if Jesse is him, Jesse's a very unimpressive figure. Who I love. He's caught plagiarizing. He wins a talent competition by basically just pinching a Pink Floyd song, and then afterwards he explains it by saying But I felt like I could have written the song, so really the fact that they'd written it first was just a technicality. All these people.
And that is such an interesting one. So the character Jeff Daniels plays is so proud and conceited and dismissive and bitter and cynical and jealous. He's such an ugly character in that way. And yet, because he's a father, he's the one Jesse Eisenberg is looking up to.
Right.
He's the one I'm learning from. And I think, that plays, that rings so true for the ways in which, we look at our fathers and we look to the men for leadership. And so tragically, their faults are not rejected and redeemed, but are taken on wholesale as, well, I will look at the world from your bitter and twisted vantage point. So his backstory as a character is that he's a writer who was reasonably successful, but then is being rejected by a number of publishers, and finds himself now as an embittered literature teacher, who just uses his lecture hall or his classroom as his own little kind of empire of dirt, as that great Nine Inch Nails song says. I will rule over this place and I will dismiss everyone else. And yet his wife, who's played by Laura Linney, who I was saying, I wasn't sure whether it was Laura Linney or Laura Dern, because they are so similar. But we realized that each is a Laura unto herself. In fact, is it possible, just to prove how similar they look, and apologies if you're listening to this later on the podcast, but to just show a picture of the two of them. This is it's not just me who makes this is confused by these two people. But anyway, Laura Linney's character, just whilst Thomas is bringing that up, is she's an author in her own right, and she's becoming more successful. There you go. If you do top left, actually, just that very first shot. And that's
I find it
not
kind of
them.
offensive
Not
that
them.
You can't tell the difference between Lauras.
Between...
Do we have any Lauras listening? I think Lauras the world over are just offended.
Look
that
at
you can't tell the
them!
difference.
Look at them!
I can't. We
faces!
can't look at anything.
Oh, we can't
Nothing's
see
up
them
here.
yet. Sorry.
We can't see them.
Sorry, it's only on my monitor. Put it on. Put it on. Then they'll all be able to see. They'll see. It's like...
Interestingly, Laura Dern actually plays a part, like they reference Blue Velvet within the film, and so Laura Dern is on screen, and you wonder whether Noah Baumbach is kind of
he's
referencing
playing with
the
you.
indistinguishability.
He's playing with you. But yeah, here we go. We're just pulling it up now. It's spinning round. Look at that. Look at that.
They are totally different. What are you talking about?
They are not different.
Laura Dern is on the left of the screen. Laura Linney is on the right. It's very obvious.
Okay. We're going to have a game, a running game now, Linney or Dern, and it's going to come up every week on this Speakeasy. But anyway, so she's thank you for that, Thomas. But she has found
we'll cut this
she's
out for the
found
podcast.
herself becoming more successful. And so her husband's reaction is not to say, "Oh, wonderful. Now our household is growing in its influence in the literary world." He says that should have been me. And that idea of jealousy and of suspicion and of self-righteousness, and it's just so ugly, and you can see so easily why Jesse Eisenberg's character would then grow up to be the kind of guy who says, "Yeah, I could have written this Pink Floyd song." Wow, Pink Floyd are amazing, and I've been found out as a cheat. But I'm good enough for that. And you just think, oh, it's just so galling. But probably worth saying that his character is the one. He has the most growth within the film. Within the story of the film, he learns to sort of...
Are you talking about Jesse now?
Jesse, yeah.
The son?
Yeah.
The eldest son, yeah.
He learns to see his father rightly.
Yes.
Or at least more objectively. And I think that as a huge theme I've found not only in my own life, but in sort of pastoral ministry, is seeing how difficult it is to get the 360 view on someone you're closely related to. It's very difficult for you to sort of look at them objectively because, of course, they were as they were to you in so many ways, and that's such a challenge when you have someone who is verbally abusive and and just such a tragic character. But
to bring it round to where we started in terms of Valentine's Day and sort of love and relationships, it brilliantly shows where the idolization of choice and the idolization of the individual doing whatever they want to do is the killer of relationships as well, because you see the father pass on relationship advice to his son that is truly disastrous, and his son is going out with a lovely girl, and it would have been lovely, like she could have been brilliant for him, but her father, full of regrets, is always telling his son, well, you can kind of cheat on her, get all you can out of her and squeeze her, so you see the breakdown of relationships in the name of just individual will and choice. So as I was watching today, thinking about our Valentine's conversation as well, I was thinking, you have in the Jesus Revolution this beautiful love that gives birth to a sense of individual agency and choice, consent, and what a wonderful thing. And that gives birth to the idea of equals having a love relationship and entering in on equal terms to a love relationship. Wonderful. But then that choice, when idolized, becomes the selfish individualism that then goes on to eat the relationship. It's kind of, and it's so starkly put in the film.
And interesting for I'm sure way more people will have seen Marriage Story, 2019, by Noah Baumbach as well. Way more people will have seen that. And that, I think, is a bit of a partner piece to this. They're both stories about marital breakdown. And yet it feels as though Noah Baumbach, in his understanding of the world as he's presenting it to you, wants to say this tragedy is so deep that we really just want to paint it as a comedy. We really want to say it's not that bad. And the ending of Marriage Story actually finishes much like a classic, romantic comedy, with this kind of great big sort of camera pull back, as they're going to distribute their or going to collect Halloween candy, having decided to break up. And it feels as though they lived unhappily ever after. But everything about the filmmaking is telling you that this is a good thing. This is resolved, when it in lots of ways it hasn't resolved. And I think relationally, thinking about Valentine's Day, thinking about as Christians, how do we relate to the world around us? As Christians, we live inside a romantic comedy. And so much around us wants us to believe that we live in a tragic story. And I just think that's such an important thing for us to do, to have that gospel perspective on a brilliant piece of filmmaking, both films, but on what's so devastating about them is this is what happens when you don't see the truth.
Yeah,
it's such a shame.
And he seems to be wanting to traumatize his audience, so that you leave the cinema traumatized, but somehow, having gone through the car wreck, your knees are wobbling, you're jittery, but you've survived. And it feels like to go through these films is to go through a traumatic experience, and it didn't exactly kill you. So, hallelujah.
Yeah. Yeah, and they look good. They look good, and they're impressive pieces of work in terms of the acting. Someone was just said, can we pull up that Robert Pye that I thought the lesson of Marriage Story was that Kylo Ren and Black Widow would be a very problematic couple. I think that may well be another lesson of Marriage Story.
Isn't that every marriage, though?
Yes. Will Kylo Ren ever be happy? I don't know. But yes, in terms of seeing the sin painted in virtue's colours to a degree, or the softening of the blow, to say, well, let's just make a nice film with this, very beautifully shot and that sort of thing. You think, well, I have an issue with that, because it's not redemptive. It's actually it's a magic trick, and it's a distraction.
Yeah.
And the hope would be that all people were, who enjoy watching it, Noah Baumbach's films, would see that the answers given do not go deep enough.
Yeah.
And it's not that we want a happy ending where the couple stays together. That doesn't always happen. But we want a happy ending in which the greater thing than marriage is the reality of the universe, that we live inside a marriage story. And that there is a greater hope.
Yeah. I mean, Peter Lightheart talked about the difference between the classical comedy and the redemptive, the Christian comedy. So in the classical world, they largely dealt with tragedy, because the fates just mean that you cannot escape your fate. You'd have no choice, and everything unravels. And that was the sort of the standard kind of mode to work in. Sometimes there were comedies, but in the comedies, he says Lightheart, the actors would be in tears while the audience laughs at them. So the knave and the fool gets his comeuppance, and he's crying, but everyone in the audience laughs. Yeah. Whereas the Christian comedy is different in that both the actor and the audience are swept up into a happily ever after that everybody can enjoy. And I kind of get that feeling with Noah Baumbach movies that we go through trauma, and they're left, as the wrecks that they are. And we've kind of survived, and so we can go about our day a little bit stronger. You want to see redemption. You so want to see redemption.
Yeah, and the slightly redemptive final part of the Squid and the Whale is for Jesse Eisenberg, as he's meeting with the child psychologist to think about his parents' marriage in a more constructive way, and in a way that allows him to sort of move through it without being embittered like his dad, is that he starts to realize the value that his mother has for him, and he starts to realize what she gave for him. And the Squid and the Whale, which is this massive kind of display in the Natural History Museum in New York, is a kind of place of redemption for him. I don't think Baumbach goes far enough in showing that, but I think that without that conclusion, and it's a thin conclusion at one level, but without that, as you say, we got through their trauma. It's okay. Let's put the kettle on. Well, maybe you got through this trauma. Is that the way to finish on Valentine's Day?
Yeah.
February the 14th, 2022. Glenn, I've never sort of been so concerned for someone to only find one line on a COVID test as I am for you tomorrow morning, because if you've got to stick it out till, was it Thursday?
Thursday officially was day 10.
Thursday officially be day 10.
It's so thin. Surely.
You can't even... Anyway, I don't think anyone can see that at all. But yes, I'm hoping that you will be back in the studio before very long. Let's hope that next Monday the three of us can join together for a completed
back
version.
as well. That'd be great.
Well, thank you very much, guys, for joining in. We've got lots of the comments there. We'll be going through those again another time. We will see you, or you will see us, this time next week, when we'll have another Speakeasy with Paul Feasy. Thank you, Thomas, for helping us with all the tech support. And we wish you a very happy, romantic Valentine's Day. Take care. Good night.
See ya. Bye.